Hi and welcome. Welcome to my story time session. So my name is Stacia, and in today's story time, my hope is to demonstrate how my subconscious, my spirit, the divine revealed things to me little by little on my journey. And as my capacity to hold these things, my consciousness and my awareness around these areas of my life and these traumas were able to expand. So yeah, this is kind of, I guess a little bit, it starts off as a little bit of a naughty story. So those of you that have been watching my Storytime sessions, you know that I worked as an entertainer, as an adult entertainer for 10 years in the sex industry, or like 11 years, whatever. And so this was during that time. I was in my mid-20s, and I had like a ride or die friend, right? So her and I, we'll call her Elle, and we used to do things together all the time. We used to work together, we used to party together, we used to hustle guys together. It was like, well, anyways, so we were crazy. Well, this story begins with a menage a trois, right? So at the time, I had an infatuation and feelings for this guy, and we'll call him D. And he was just a couple years older than me. He had his own house, he had a business, and he was a drug dealer. So he was checked off all the boxes. But yeah, so he was really cool, and I was really into him, really infatuated, and I started to develop feelings for him. And we had a really, superficial relationship, very physical relationship, but he was also very grounding for me at that time, especially because my life was super chaotic and super fast and busy, right? So we were having a little menage a trois, the three of us. And during it, also I'll note here too, I developed feelings for my friend as well. And this was really uncomfortable for me because I was developing an emotional, relationship type of vibe feelings for her. And this wasn't how our friendship was. And it was really uncomfortable, as in this moment, that's something that also played out for me. So during the physical act of the three of us playing together, right, I was suddenly hit with this flashback. So I had this trigger, this flashback, and I think the trigger was the three of us. And this flashback was a S letter X childhood trauma. And in that childhood trauma, it was me and my sister. My sister was a baby. She was less than one. She was just a baby. I'm assuming, or maybe one, but she was a baby. And in this flashback, we were being traumatized. We were being abused. And during that time, I was holding on to her, and I was crying. And then the abuser was a male abuser. So, which is really interesting because, so when this trauma and this trigger came up for me, it kind of made sense because, here I am having a threesome. There's two females and a male, very similar. But also another layer that was very similar for me was the emotional unsafety that I felt in both scenarios, because I started to develop emotional feelings for both parties, and I wasn't really comfortable with that. And it was something that just kind of all opened and all unfolded in this moment. And so when this happened, during that present moment of the three of us being together, the menage a trois, the three adults, I was just I can't do this. I can't do this with you guys, and it shook me. That trigger, that trauma shook me so much, but I also didn't have the full capacity to process it, to deal with it, to sit with it, or the desire. I just didn't want to deal with it. It was a trauma, it was a trigger, and this is, for me, this is also how I also experienced my inner child, something coming up, and I was just no, I'm not dealing with that, and it wasn't exactly an ideal time to do with it. And maybe it was, maybe there was a grander plan. Had I been more open and receiving of that information, maybe I could have shared that with them, and maybe that would have brought us closer together. Who knows, right? But I didn't. My reaction was to stop what I was doing because it was triggering me, and create a wall and distance there from the situation, and then also to not process what had happened. So, that was kind of the end of that fun, right? So, fast forward, like another year or two later, I'm not the best with keeping the time, because for me, my spiritual journey and my healing journey has kind of been like all over the place, right? So this is probably, and this period, these 11 years of my life were just really wild, right? And so a year or two later, I was kind of spiraling. I was really going through it, a lot of depression, kind of like dark night of the soul. It was really in my awareness that I was probably like 27 at this time, didn't want to be in the industry anymore, just had a lot of stuff going on, didn't have the best relationship with my family, and just as I got older, these traumas and these triggers started to reveal themselves to me more and more. And so my solution was to drink and do more drugs, party, have sex, be wild. It was just anything I could do to not sit with these things because it was so painful. And when I did try to get some help, I had a really terrible experience with a therapist I'll have to share another time. But yeah, so I was really struggling with that, and I was kind of in a dark night of the soul, and I was spiraling, and it was almost like I was descending. So there's different spiritual teachings and different mystical school teachings, kind of like the 7 layers of heaven and the 7 layers of hell, or the 7 realms of heaven and the 7 realms of hell, like kind of like a Dante's Inferno type of deal. And what was happening in my depression this one night, when I was having these downward spirals, and I would get overwhelmed, right? So I would be ashamed of what I was doing for a living, completely feeling like I was completely alone and isolated, and I didn't have anyone to depend on or anyone I could really trust. And so I was dealing with all of this heavy stuff by myself, and my faith was waning all the time, so it was like I was having good moments with my faith, and then other moments of just complete unravel. So this night, I think I was descending down the spiral to these heavier realms, these denser realities, these possibilities in my mind, right? So I was kind of in this almost like a psychosis, like a spiritual psychosis, like a very just dark night of the soul. And a lot of really strange things happened that night for me, in this like kind of spiritual psychosis, this dark night, and I was descending. And one of the things that happened is I had some sort of intervention with like aliens or extraterrestrial beings, I'm really struggling with that word, beings, these aliens. And this was my first conscious encounter that I can recall to this day right now. I think the further I go on the journey and the more these things reveal themselves to me, obviously there's like, oh, this happened before that, type of thing. So this is my first encounter, my first conscious, and what I can recall right now with aliens. And I didn't have, to this my memory of now, like I don't recall like physically seeing them, like I'm seeing the camera and you're seeing me, and it wasn't that type of experience. It was a very like spiritual, mental, telepathic type of experience, and they infiltrated my mind, I guess, and I guess I see this as like a benevolent experience, because they were kind of like the typical gray type of aliens, I would say, but where the realm that I was experiencing this, everything was in blackness, and this is one of the spirit realms that I go into, and I will just say this, it happens to me a lot spontaneously, where I work in this realm of blackness, and so I'm in this realm of blackness, and I'm approached by an alien, sort of type of comes into my psyche, comes into my awareness, in my inner eye, in my mind's eye, and I see their face. And then these aliens, they take me on this journey, this timeline journey into my timeline to that traumatic event. So with my sister and with, the person. And at this point in time, my sister, so we were living in Canada on the Mi'kmaq reservation, Mi'kmaq Nation, and my sister's biological father is Mi'kmaq Indian. I'm not Mi'kmaq Indian, even though my last name, Wysot, comes from the tribe. That's a whole story for another day. My mom changed all of my name and everything else, right? So they brought me back to the tribe. They brought me back to that moment, the alien or aliens. I feel like there was more than one, but for right now, I'm only seeing one. Brought me back to that moment of trauma, and what they showed me, which is very similar to my ayahuasca experience, is they showed me the person that was traumatizing us and just kind of like opened up, like I was just completely blown open with like a mass amount of information about them and their abuse and their traumas and everything. So I was having, this huge download, this just like a million pictures at once just shoved into my consciousness and into my mind, and not even just visualizing it, but having a deep level of emotional awareness and understanding. It was just like a whole nother level of communication, and the only way I can describe this is as a download. So I was just given this download really quickly of all of this information, and through that I was able to cultivate compassion and understanding of the sickness that was in this person, and it took me being in a lot of pain and in this hellish realm, in this downward spiral of the dark night of the soul, to have this level of suffering, for something to come in to pull me out of the suffering and to show me related to this specific trauma, right? So as this was unfolding, it's not that it condemned this person. And I really want to speak on this because as we're all on different parts of our journey, especially those of us that went through a lot of childhood trauma, it's not about forgiving their actions, or I don't even want to say forgiving, but it's not allowing and accepting their actions is okay. We're not saying like that's okay, like, oh, they were fucked up, they had a lot of terrible things happen to them, so that makes it okay. No, because a lot of terrible things happen to me, and I try my best to not be in that energy. I try not to be those people. I don't want to recreate the traumas and the things that were done to me. I don't want to bring that into that world, into my world. And so that was so hard to say, right? But anyways, nobody's perfect. But these traumas, so after I was able to cultivate that level of awareness and empathy and compassion, it made the process easier to accept. And with these aliens, with these like other dimensional beings, these extraterrestrial beings, I don't know where they came from. I don't know enough about it, and I've never asked. I don't sit there and try to like communicate to the aliens, like, what's up guys? Where do you come from? What are you doing? Which is funny because one of my teachers is always saying, ask questions. But I'm like along for the ride in a lot of this, especially in my early journey, which I guess it's still pretty early, right? Anyway, so I'm going through this compassion, this acceptance, this understanding, and having that level of awareness, that level of consciousness, that's like a higher level of being. You're moving up the spiral, a higher level of vibration. So that lower suffering of the victim of the trauma, because I was a victim and I survived this horrific moment, and I had nobody to confide in because this was a family member and it was not safe, right? So it's went from that lower level of being an experience of fear and trauma to doing basically what some like Central America, South America shamans refer to as soul retrieval. And this, I think, was one of my first soul retrievals, where I was assisted by these alien type beings, right? They assisted a soul retrieval with me. And through that, it was like, because, traumas, right? Not to go too off page, but, the psyche or the soul shatters. And, there's certain schools of thought or disciplines where they teach, and even in some sort of psychology stuff, where basically the psyche fractures and it's like it's stuck in time. It's lost in this place. A part of you lives there, right? So it was like this soul retrieval. And I hope I explained that well. That's to the best of my knowledge. So this was my first soul retrieval, assisted soul retrieval with these dimensional beings, these aliens or whatever they are, right? And because I was able to move from those lower realms of energy and transmute that with the guidance of understanding, with the guidance of compassion and that awareness, I was able to accept it and let it go. I released that pain and suffering. It doesn't mean, this isn't like one of those timeline therapy teachings where you take out the pain and suffering and then you replace it with something good and clear your timeline. And no, like, this existed, did happen to me, is a part of me and a part of my awareness and a part of my journey and part of my spiritual development. And because I was assisted with this soul retrieval and this deep understanding and awareness, I was able to let it go and accept it and have love and compassion for myself and understanding for that person, right? And able to move on. Now, that's not to say that I still don't get triggers. Like, I get triggered all of the time. And this is definitely a process for me, as it is for most of you, right? Even if you don't have this type of trauma, childhood trauma, any type of experience, whether it be like neglect, maybe your parents had to work all of the time and they couldn't see you and they couldn't talk to you, give you the time that you needed. So over and over again, that conditioned you to not perhaps feeling worthy, feeling like you don't matter. So there's like so many different traumas. Like, trauma is trauma, right? So moving on from that, just being able to ascend that energy within myself, that soul retrieval, my awareness, the compassion, that was one of the first, that was the first soul retrieval, and that was the first spiritual experiences that I ever had with like an alien that I can recall. And this is pretty cool. And at this time, what did I do afterwards, right? Was I like this super like into like aliens? No. I started watching the alien shows and like whatever, but I just kind of accepted it. And I think because I've had these in and out spiritual experiences from very early on, I just kind of like, I don't super fixate on it, or I didn't at that time. Later on in my journey, that really intense spiritual awakening that I had, I did super fixate on that, because I was like, that was so out there, so crazy, so much stuff had happened that I was like trying to understand it and couldn't let that go, and whatever else, who knows, right? But yeah, so this is just a little story that I wanted to share with you, and to demonstrate how, this trauma revealed itself. This came through and then later revealed itself again, and how I was able to process it, and the intervention that came in for me that was able to assist me with that. And that's just kind of how I experience a lot of this stuff, and especially the inner child work that I do with myself. And over time, the more and more that I sit with my inner child, the more things that are revealed and come through, and the lighter I feel. Because after that experience, I definitely felt at peace. I was no longer spiraling, and I was able to kind of just sit with myself and hold that. I wasn't pushing it away anymore. I wasn't like unable to deal with it. Like, no, I don't want to deal with that. But I was able to be with it and experience it. And that's the thing about suffering, right? So you suffer, you sit with it little by little sometimes to build up your ability to hold your own suffering. But anyways, I hope that was helpful. I'd love to hear any of your stories. If you have any questions for me, you can always DM me on this platform or Instagram or whatever. And yeah, until next story time, thank you so much.